This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Hey guys, today we've got a busy video, so let me tell you what's in store. Jeremy Yelles forged this really nice hunter with integral guard out of a ball bearing. In this video, we're going to watch clips of him working, then go through step by step making a handle. We're talking about making stuff parallel and square. Then we're going to cut up some glorious torrefied maple, look at them handle shapes, get deep in that tedium, shape this handle up, and then carve it. Here we go. These are clips Jeremy sent me of forging that ball bearing out. It's really interesting. Take a look. I'm very excited to work with this, but first I want to tell you about Skillshare. What is Skillshare? It's an online learning community where millions of people come together to take that next step in their creative journey. Skillshare offers instruction in all kinds of crafting, music, film, maker-type stuff. This is content for dabblers and masters alike. They even have live classes. I recently watched this video on wood carving and I learned all about the history of wood spirits and learned techniques like stop cuts. When watching the class, I actually made this little guy. Skillshare has no ads, less zero advertisements, so you can get out of the internet attention economy and spend a Saturday afternoon connecting with your child or someone close to you. New content is constantly being added, and right now, Skillshare is less than $10 per month with an annual subscription. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a free trial of a premium membership so you can explore your creativity today. Go check out Skillshare right now. Thanks, guys. There are some unique challenges with this blade since the goal is to keep it as forged. In other words, with the forged scale still on it. Because we won't be squaring or paralleling the guard, it's going to be tough to square these shoulders such that the handle is flush and lines up with the blade correctly, right? For example, how do I know the file jig is straight side to side and perpendicular to the blade if the guard isn't perfectly symmetric? In knife making, a lot of excruciating time is spent making things flat, such that they can then be made parallel and ultimately perpendicular in some cases. Another common problem is in many forged knives, the blades are forged with a taper towards the tip, meaning we can't just lay the blade on something flat or clamp it in a mill on parallel bars and expect it will be symmetrically oriented. I saw Alex Steele do something like what I'm about to show you years ago, and I believe many knife makers probably do something very similar. Let me show you what I'm talking about. We can use a height gauge to help us make sure the blade and tang line up and that the shoulders are square and the guard is parallel side to side. Okay, we've got a flat surface and two blocks. We're going to rest and then gently clamp the tip of the knife to one of the blocks. This is going to be our fulcrum. The tip of the knife is fixed in place more or less. Then we use a shorter block to rest the tang of the knife on, and to adjust its height on that side, we can stack or remove thin stuff. I suggest feeler gauges, a deck of cards, strips of sandpaper, or human eyelash. The height gauge is set to the middle of the tip of the blade and run across our flat surface to see if it remains in the middle of the blade. If not, the feeler gauges, or whatever, under the handle are adjusted up or down until it does. Now we can see if the tang and blade are straight, then determine the middle of our guard in the case that it is integral. Then the height gauge is adjusted up and down by equal amounts to mark parallel lines on the guard for grinding them flat and even. Once those are ground parallel, clamping a file jig will make the shoulders we file in automatically squared, or we can mark the shoulders at this time with something like this square. For longer blades, now would probably be a good time to scribe a center line on the edge side of the knife so that you can grind a straight cutting edge later. Unfortunately, we're leaving our guard as forged and not precisely paralleling the sides, meaning we're taking our chances when we clamp our file jig to it as to whether or not our shoulders are really going to be nice and square with the blade. Fortunately, Jeremy did a pretty good job keeping things lined up and relatively flat, so things are going to work out pretty good. This is a carbide file guide, and believe it or not, you can put it on a grinder with ceramic belts and it doesn't really scratch up or lose material. We're using it to grind in our shoulders beneath the guard, a flat area that will abut the handle, and it has to be perfectly flat to flush up. With a 120 grit belt that's fresh and some care, I've occasionally been able to skip hand filing the shoulders, but this usually strips the edges of the belt and the tang really isn't that well squared afterwards, so often a small amount of touch-up with the file is still necessary no matter how much work you do with it on the grinder. Here's another knife I just finished touching up a little better with a fresher file, and you can see that things are a little more square. This is our Mighty Alrighty piece of curly maple. It's about $79 worth of wood. It'll make, I don't know, about 5 handles or something, and it is torrefied, which is a fancy name for roasted. Roasting removes moisture and sugars in the wood, stabilizes it to some degree, and darkens it a bit. Torrefied maple is often used in guitar necks. All right, let's get you off to the saw. Yep. I got you, buddy. It's okay. It's okay. I got you, buddy. I got you. Let's go. All right, let's go. In hidden tang handle construction, it is important to have a squared up block of wood to start. So when making a regular hidden tang handle, say without a through tang that's peened or without a pommel nut, I found I can get away with maybe having 2 parallel sides and 1 perpendicular end and work with that pretty easily. But in my experience, more complex handles like the ones mentioned above require really all sides to be squared with each other to avoid headaches and or wasted handle material down the road. Many knife makers actually put their handle blocks on mills at this point for the purposes of paralleling and squaring everything. I'm going to use these calipers and measure out the dimensions of the tang at the base of the guard and mark them here on the piece of wood. Now you can see here that this isn't squared up. It's more of a rhombus there. When I put it on my square, you can see it pulls away. So I've taken it to the grinder and tried to square it up roughly by eye, and it's close enough for what we're doing. I don't anticipate any problems from that. Time to drill our holes. Now I've got a drill bit that is wider than the base, but narrower than the top of the tang. Good enough. As you can see in the drill vise, I can adjust the angle of the block of wood to match the angle of the tang. There's just a thin little barrier between those drill holes, and I can sort of gouge it out with the drill. The drill presses aren't really made for this, so you have to be pretty careful. This broach saw is highly effective. I got mine at Black Dragon Forge's website. I think you can get them sort of all over the place. While I've been tediously broaching my tang hole, I've decided that a spacer would look nice. So these pieces are cut out of brass and some 15 and 20. I think I got a thin piece of 15 and 20 laying around. I'm going to super glue them together and we'll start drilling them out and putting guide pin holes in place. Again, we've measured the bottom of our guard and we're going to plot that out on our material. I have a mill, but I'm trying to demonstrate this process without using it, basically. In that case, we drill out a lot of holes next to each other, then I'm going to use a Dremel to punch through the sides of the holes, connect them all, and then we'll file everything flush. This next step with the Dremel can sometimes separate the metal because it gets pretty hot. So I'm going to go ahead and mark and drill my guide pin holes while everything's together. There they are. Drilling guide pin holes in the handle material isn't going to be a problem, but what about the guard? I can't really get at that at a straight angle, so I've just used a Dremel tool to mark, and then we're going to put sort of some shallow holes in there. They won't fit precisely or snugly or deeply, but they'll be enough to help index the piece while we get it sanded and keep it in the right spot on the guard. So as you can see, we just grind away at the edges, then we mark the spacer material and slowly move in on the dimensions of the guard. We can take material away, but we can't put it back. We started on the decorative file work on our spacer material now. Unfortunately, we hogged out a little too much of the middle portion, so I've had to go back and redo the brass fitting. It's going to fit a little bit tighter now, and I'm very happy we did that. This means we'll also have to go back and redo its metal counterparts. Not a problem. We'll just sit back down and spend several more hours filing away. We're going to leave the indexing pins just barely protruding from the bottom of the spacer material and then press everything tightly together so that they leave marks on the handle material, and we can drill out our indexing holes there too as well. Let's talk handle shapes. It took me a really long time to grasp sort of some basic handle shapes. But I think it's important to look at them and sort of incorporate them into your work if you're a new knife maker, and learn to draw them out and trace them onto a handle if necessary. I think it's just something we all struggle with at some point in our journey. This one over here is the most common one I saw in production knives when I was selling knives. And that includes kitchen knives, outdoor knives. It fits most hands very well. It's very comfortable. I think that's why it's used so commonly. It's a fantastic place to start if you're profiling some of your first handle blades. I forgot to draw the finger notch handle seen over here in the corner. I bought these French curves to play with. Drawing out handles at one point, I used these, and there's some logarithmic curves that you can trace and things like that if you're having trouble drawing stuff. I think they're a good resource. There's lots of different ends or butts to handles you can put on them. You know, you can use pommel swells, pistol grips, coffin style handles and stuff like that. These are some of the ones that come to mind at any rate. We are going to keep things sort of simple. Now, what about the length of a handle? You know, for me, I think most of my handles come in between 4 and 4.5 inches, usually around 4 1/4 inches. It just sort of depends on what's going on, mostly at the butt end of the handle. You have to build your handle, I think, with your customer in mind, you know, how old are they, how big are their hands, that sort of thing. We're going to keep our handle pretty simple because we have to do some carving on it, and carving around curves is pretty difficult. With the help of our guide pins, it's fairly easy to determine where exactly in our handle material our tang resides, and we can mark the center of our handle and then pick the corresponding spot on our tang to drill out. We're going to drill out a 3/16 hole. I learned this trick watching Liam Hoffman. You put a 3/16 inch piece of softer material like brass or copper or something in that hole, and then when you go to drill through your handle material, through your tang, the drill bit doesn't want to wander and tear out your wood, and if something happens, you need to redo the handle. You have to throw the handle away and get a new one. You don't have to try to match up a 1/16 inch hole in your tang by guessing where to drill in your piece of wood. You can just punch out that softer piece of metal there, put a new piece in there, and you're good to go. Here I'm going to partially bed the tang with G-Flex epoxy prior to drilling the pinhole. I'm not going to do a full bedding of the tang because I don't want glue up in the spacer fixtures just yet. That makes separating everything for handle shaping very difficult, and I just don't want everything glued up yet. I don't want to deal with all that. So I put some crayon on the tang to try to make it separate from the epoxy. I've used beeswax in the past. I've actually used crayon pretty successfully. This time it was sort of difficult. Maybe I'll go back to beeswax, but at any rate, that's where our hole ended up being. We've got our handle cut out more. Let's do some more shaping. We've got everything pretty close on the grinder, sort of in the too close for comfort range. I don't want to ruin this handle range. So it's time to put the knife back in there, and we're going to put some protection around the spacer and the guard with 3 layers of painter's tape. I think duct tape and electrician's tape works better for this, but I just don't have any right now. So we're going to use 3 layers of painter tape on a slow belt speed. We do not want to grind into our spacer or guard right now. That'd be pretty catastrophic. When things are starting to get pretty flush with the painter's tape and the wood on the grinder, we're going to move to hand sanding and flush everything up. Since there's 3 layers of painter tape on each side of the spacer material, if we flush things up now, we'll get a nice even museum fit all the way around, or at least we should. This is sanded to 600 grit. I have sort of a nice set of wood carving chisels, even some small wood carving chisels with curved ends and V's and all kinds of stuff. But I'm just not very proficient with them. And in the end, this is a hardwood, and the Dremel just ended up being a little bit easier. I can clean things up with the chisels later if I need to, and I can certainly hog out some material with the chisels when I need to. I'm really aiming for some deep relief here. I'd like to really sort of make this a very projected image that really stands out. At this point, it's been sanded to 1000 grit. I'm going to put some darker Danish oil on it, let it dry, then sand it to 5000 grit and put a second coat of lighter Danish oil I'll probably put a couple coats of True Oil on later. I'm still thinking about it at this time. Okay, last words of wisdom. It's not too late to ruin your handle right now, believe it or not. Always taper your handle pin before you drive it through. If it catches on the far side of the wood of the handle, it can tear it out. I learned this the hard way. Much appreciation to Jeremy Yelle at Yelles Cutlery for forging this awesome hunter and sending it to me. This knife will be auctioned on eBay 100% to charity. Check the description below for a link.